I'm Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we are here with Laura Knight Yedshik, and she's got a huge body of work that I'm amazed by. You are intellectually very astute. You're an amazing researcher. You're also a wonderful channel, if you want to call yourself a channel. It's kind of a loose
I
way.
avoid that term.
Okay, fine. And I've studied your work, and I'm really impressed.
Thank you.
What would be great is to hear a little bit about your intellectual history, because you're an amazing writer, and you're very clear. You're very clear in the way you think. That's what I've gathered from reading your work, and I think that that's a special skill. And so maybe you could talk about, just for the very basics, because some people are out there are going to want to know, did you graduate from college, that kind of thing.
No, I didn't graduate from college. I had children instead, and that's a fairly common story for many very bright, intelligent women who are brought up to take care of other people. They have children, or they have families, and we're taught that that's the most important thing for a woman. My generation was taught that, and when the family comes along, everything else gets put aside. It was rather difficult for me, because I did have a very powerful curiosity. It's been described by other people as an epic curiosity, and I would say that if anything describes me, that's curiosity. I'm a walking question mark. I literally want to know everything, and I know it's impossible to know everything, but I want to, grab everything I can as long as I'm alive. I did go to college. I was kind of a professional student for 2 or 3 years. But then, like I said, I had a baby, and that was the end of my college career. But it wasn't the end of my intellectual pursuits, because I had developed the habit as a very young child of reading approximately an entire book every day. And and that really started after I had been in 7th grade, when I was 13 years old, because we had a teacher who taught us to speed read, which was a very clever thing. He had a machine that he brought in the class. He taught everybody to speed read, and I thought, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, because I can read very, very fast. And I was blessed with a photographic memory, so that I could not only read, but I could remember everything I read. Mm-hmm. This was very handy at test time, because I could pull everything out of my memory for taking tests. So, I was very good at taking tests, but I was really bad at doing homework, because for me, homework was just, drudgery. Why should I sit there and write down for somebody else, to prove that I've, done this busy work? It didn't interest me. I mean, I had read the book. I had the material in my head. I didn't see any point in belaboring it. I wanted to go to the next thing. So I didn't turn in a lot of homework, but I made A's on all my tests, so that, that kind of confuses teachers who like things to be done by the book. So I continued this habit all through the time my children were little, and as I've written, at the point that I'd had my 4th child, and I was bedridden, so not only did I pursue my habit of reading as much as I possibly could, but I got into some other things, because there was a lot of stress in my life. So I began practicing things like, meditation and so on and so forth.
And how old were you approximately during this time? When you started meditating, for example?
When I started meditating, let's see, my 4th child was born in 1985, so that would be when I started meditating.
Mm-hmm. And how did that go for you?
Well, I had extraordinary results in a very short period of time, and that's That's a whole other story, because we've developed a breathing and meditation program based on the technique that I developed more or less on my own, just based on reading some material about meditation. And it was a combination of meditative techniques and hypnotherapeutic techniques, because I had also trained as a hypnotherapist.
When did you train as a hypnotherapist?
When I was going to college, I was 21 years old.
Oh, really? So you'd already decided to go in that direction?
Yeah, because I wanted to know everything, and one of the things I wanted to know was what goes on in the human mind, what makes people act the way they do, what makes people think the way they do. Why is it that people say that they love something and then they treat it so abominably? Why do people say I'm a good person and act so bad? And why do all of the contradictions of life? Because people say things, but then you see in reality that that's not exactly what really happens. And of course there's the religious impetus. I was brought up in a very religious family. We were Methodist when I was growing up. And
well, we actually want to go there slightly. I know that you had sort of a time in which you were, I don't know if you want to call it kidnapped or something of that nature, by a family member, I think, someone related to you.
Yes, stepfather.
Because that seems to have sort of
that
you.
was kind of the it was the trigger. I was 2.5, 3 years old, and my mother and father had been divorced when I was very young. Obviously, because they were divorced before I was 2.5 and 3. And my mother had remarried a man who was an ex-Navy man that she met in Orlando, where she was living and working at the time, where we were living there. And it varies after a whirlwind courtship, and I think it was because he danced so well. My mother was a dancer. And so he moved us to Jacksonville, and it was in Jacksonville that he started behaving, rather erratically, to say the least. Doing strange things, like she would come home and find him huddled in a fetal position in the closet with his hands over his head, and saying that somebody was coming to get him, or something was going on, or he would, he was extremely paranoid. And my mother, knew this wasn't normal behavior. And it got worse, so there was a separation. And I, being a child, in those days, parents didn't really tell children what's going on. It's not like, you're not supposed to talk to your stepfather anymore. And actually I liked him. He was kind of fun. He was entertaining. He was good to me. So he had been showing me pictures of cars in a magazine, and asked me, he said he wanted to get a new car, and if he was going to get a new car, what color car I would want. And I said, yellow and black. And so several weeks later, and this was after he was gone, he drives up to the house in a yellow and black convertible. And do I want to go for a ride? And since nobody had told me I wasn't supposed to speak to him or go anywhere with him, of course I'll go. So I went for a ride. We went down a long drive through a lot of forest. Came to a road that turned off into the forest, drove down this long road, and at the end of this road there was a clearing, like a perfectly square, well-mown clearing, grass, and in the center of the clearing was a small white clapboard house with a porch. Just looked like an ordinary, like a farmhouse even, except that there was nothing anywhere around this. I mean, it was smack in the middle of this very large clearing that was very, well manicured. And there were two men in khaki-looking uniforms and a woman in a white dress that were standing on the porch. We drive up to the house, and they said, well, we've been waiting for you, and welcomed me to come inside the house. And sat me down at a dining room table. I remember sitting at the dining room table, and they were asking me questions. I don't remember the questions. And then one of them said, "You must be very tired, you know, you need to take a nap." And I agreed. And they took me into this room, and there was a stainless steel baby bed. And they put me in this stainless steel baby bed and gave me a bottle. And I'm thinking, I'm 2.5, 3 years old. I didn't think that, but I'm thinking, I'm too big for a bottle. But they gave me this bottle and said, "Here, no, it's okay, you can have this." And so I started to drink this bottle because I was hungry. And that's the last thing I remember until I was I remember sitting in the car with my stepfather, and we were driving very fast through, a lot of flashing lights, so it was like in the city. And we were being chased by the police. And he, was trying to weave around to avoid capture and going very fast and turning corners and so forth. And then he ended up, because apparently there was another one that was coming around from the front, and so he drove up on somebody's lawn and crashed into a palm tree. And I hit my face on the dashboard. And I remember the policeman coming and taking me out of the car. And then I remember the policeman handing me over to my mother, and that's basically what I remembered for most of my life. Everything from the time I drank that bottle until I came to myself in this car was a complete blank.
And when did you start to recover those memories?
Well, the first problem with something like that is we're talking about the memory of a 2.5, 3-year-old child. Is the child remembering, and I understood this, am I remembering anything accurately? So, of course, I had to question my mother about it, and she gave some details. And what had happened that is known from the outside is that as soon as she had discovered that I was missing, she called my grandmother in Tampa. We were in Jacksonville. She called my grandmother in Tampa. My grandmother called my grandfather, who was in Nassau. In fact, I don't think he was in Nassau. He was on an out island working on an engineering job. And they sent a plane to pick him up from the out island to Nassau. Flew from Nassau to Tampa, got in his car, drove to Jacksonville. So at least 2 full days, possibly 3, had passed before he went to the police station with my mother, because my mother had gone to the police station and they had told her that because she was married to this man and he was my legal stepfather, that she couldn't file any kind of kidnapping charge against him because, he was entitled to take me where he wanted to take me. So when my grandfather got in there, he apparently was a little more forceful than my mother, and they began to take it seriously, which is why when they spotted my stepfather driving down the road with me in the car, they began to pursue. So that's kind of the backstory.
Do you know how many days went by?
Well, my mother, when I finally questioned her about it, she didn't really remember. She just said it was several days. And as I just said, I figure it must have been 2 or 3 because of the time that, it could have been 3 or 4. Because of the time it took for the information to get to my grandfather, for him to get there. He had to...
Were they wealthy? I mean, you're saying he flew from here to there and so on and so forth.
My grandparents were, like middle-class people. He was a marine engineer. He designed and supervised the building of ships. Before that, he'd done bridges and dredges and so forth. And
was your father
employed
at that? I mean, was your stepfather employed at that time?
That I can't tell you. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Did you ever see him in uniform?
No, but that was a peculiar thing because after this event, according to my mother, they went to the police station to sign papers to press charges. And when they got there, they found that he had been taken into custody, that the Navy Department had showed up to take him into custody because he belonged to them. And later on, it was suggested that he worked for ONI. And I, of course, read a great deal about the kinds of experiments that they were doing on people.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother.
Okay, and he wasn't kidnapped.
No.
Interesting. And what is your, if you don't mind my asking, are you Celtic?
Well, I suppose.
Well, the reason, there's a basis for that because I don't know if you're familiar with Duncan O'Finian, the super soldier that we interviewed, but his background is Celtic and Native American, and they were looking for, he was basically picked up as a child. His father worked for the CIA. And so what they seem to have done, especially back in the 50s, was to target the children of people that were related to the military and special, services.
Well, I can tell you a little. I mean, my genealogy is up on the internet on my website. I got into genealogy at one point, pretty obsessively, 9 or 10 hours a day for a year. And finally, my husband said to me, when are you going to be satisfied when you get back to Adam? And then I realized I'd been giving it a lot too, way too much time. But I'm descended from the Percys of, Henry Hotspur fame. That's an interesting family. That's also
That's an Illuminati name, though, isn't it?
I don't think so, because the Percy family that now carries the name is not even, blood relation to the original Percys.
Ah.
The Percys spent a lot of time in opposition to the ruling families of England. Quite a few ancestors ended their days in cages hanging from the outsides of castle walls. Their castle, which of course no longer belongs to them, there's a family called Percy that's there, the Duke of Northumberland, is the castle that they filmed the Harry Potter films in, by the way.
But you're saying that's not your family lineage?
No, the people who are currently carrying the name aren't even Percys.
Interesting. Okay.
They took the name, and
so their real name is
actually their
Percival
their name was Smithson, and they are directly related to the individual who went to America and created the Smithsonian Institution. And also, there's another branch of the family. I hate to admit this, but I've got to tell you that another branch of the family are the Pierces that gave birth to Barbara Pierce, who married George Bush.
Really?
Very distant relations, people, very distant.
No, it's it's all in the human family, right? So
yeah. They spell their name with a P-I-E. My Percys, when they came to America, they spelled it P-E-A-R-C-E. So there was, an immediate split, like in 1600, that's how long ago it was. Mm-hmm. So don't hook me up with those people.
No, I hear you. But to get back to the story, so when did your memories, of this incident in which, we don't know exactly, I don't know, at least you're not telling me at the moment, but did you find out what exactly happened to you during those 4 days in some kind of regression therapy?
Well, this was something that really bothered me because, as I said, I have a pretty photographic memory, and I can remember all the way back to being an infant in a high chair being fed. Those are some among my earliest memories, not even being able to handle a spoon myself, but being conscious, fully conscious of myself and the people around me in the room, and having, memories of what's going on. So having a period of my life that was just like, that began rather dramatically and ended rather dramatically, of which I had absolutely no memory, was something that really bothered me. So, I worried with it for years. And of course, a lot of my work in hypnotherapy was helping people recover memories. But the unfortunate thing is I'm like not hypnotizable.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And did you find that out early
when
on?
I trained in hypnotherapy, because you have the teacher and you work on each other, you practice on each other. The teacher works on you and practices on you, and I'm really not hypnotizable. So, even trying to deliberately go into like a self-hypnotic state, when I'm not concerned about somebody else, giving up control to somebody else, even that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Because there's this conscious watching part of my mind, this analytical thing that never never turns off. So it worried me, and I
So
thought about it a lot
how
over
did
the
you get
years.
those memories back?
And it became even more of a worry because after Tom French did his article about me in the St. Pete Times back in 2000, was it 2000? Yeah, he'd spent 5 years practically living in our house because he thought that what I did was interesting. And, you know, we talked about this, and he was curious about it, and that kind of reawakened it.
I see.
And, you know, like, what happened? And he interviewed members of the family and confirmed, you know, my memory. Mm-hmm. But we never, nobody ever really knew what happened. So it started to worry me, you know, like in the sense of nagging in my mind. And I asked my husband to go with me to a highly recommended hypnotherapist. I was going to try again. And I thought, if I can just try, and if my husband's there in the room with me, and I can really, really relax, you know, maybe I can get there and I can do it. So we went and we tried. It didn't work. This woman tried everything, every trick in the book. And she was good. She really was good. But, you know, I'm sitting there the whole time. I'm analyzing her technique, you know. I would have drawn that out just a little longer. I would have phrased that slightly differently. Oh, good touch. Yes, like that. I'll have to remember how to use that. You know, that sort of thing. So, but then what I started doing, I started doing pre-sleep work, which was I would start to really think about it every night before I go to sleep, really get intense and think about it and go through everything I could remember right up to that moment, and then what I could remember, and just, you know, like slice by slice. And my husband and I were talking about a lot of things, and I was going through a lot of emotional releases on many things because I was using my own breathing and meditation program that
And
we'll
what
talk about
year
later.
was this, would you say?
This was in 1997, 98.
Okay.
So what happened was I started having very vivid dreams that I thought were related to this. And one night I actually had a dream where I had gone to sleep thinking about everything right up to the point where we arrived at this house and went inside and got the bottle. And the dream continued on with what happened. And it was like so intense and so real that I woke up sobbing, you know, just sobbing uncontrollably. And my husband, you know, what's going on? And I said, I remembered.
Wow.
And I'm really convinced that I did remember. Mm-hmm. But this is one of those things where you have no empirical evidence. You're still depending on a very fallible human mind. The human mind, you know, I know as well or better than anyone how fallible it is, how impressionable it can be. So I can tell you what I remembered in this dream, but I cannot tell you that it's a fact.
Okay.
And I cannot even tell you that I believe it. And this is where you'll find me a little bit different than most people, because I don't believe anything. I assign probabilities, and probabilities can change, you know, with the addition of new information. But I would give it greater than 50%, maybe going up towards 65 or 70% probability of being probably what happened.
Okay, and do you want to share?
Well, it's something that I'm sure that other people have talked about these things where I remember being in a room, and it seems to me that they were using some kind of drugs like LSD to experiment on me, to put me in an altered state, to then try to program me. And the programming was designed to make me repressed, shy, withdrawn, what would you say? Somebody who doesn't like to make friends or can't make friends, or is afraid to make friends, or is afraid to speak to other people.
And this is at the age of like two or three. Yeah, incredible. I mean, the fact they start so early is fascinating. But this is where you actually had that. I mean, I think you should describe, because we talked earlier about the, the actual vision that you saw and the repeated, because that is a programming technique, I believe.
Well, it started out that first I was in a room, just a bare room with a wooden floor, sitting on the floor. I'd been given some little toys to play with. I don't even think I was a blanket or anything. I would think it was totally bare. And I was sitting there, and somebody came in and gave me something, and then they said, "You just wait here and we'll be back." And so I'm sitting there just, looking around at the room. And as I was looking around, all of a sudden the walls started melting. And I understand that this is a fairly common effect of hallucinogenic substances. And the next thing was, I remember being taken into what was like a classroom scene. And I was taken in, and in front of the class, this, like a woman took me in and introduced me to a teacher and the children, and everybody was very friendly and smiling and like a very happy, new kid at school, totally accepted by everyone. Here's your seat, everybody friendly, all the children, saying all these nice things. Sitting down in this, in my desk, and the little girl next to me says, "Can we be best friends?" Which is what any little kid wants to hear. And of course, to me, it was like wonderful, because my dream at that age was to go to school. Here I am in a real school, and there's other children, and they like me and they accept me. And so I sit down, and this little girl passes me a note, and the next thing that happens is all these soldiers come exploding into the room with guns firing, and everybody gets blown to bits. I mean, just really horrible. I mean, with, bodies bouncing and flopping around, and brains coming out, and blood and bits of bone and gore and everything, and it splattering all over me, and then I'm the only one left standing.
Incredible.
And, and it's like, screaming and crying and screaming and crying. So then the next scene is me walking in like a park setting, and there's this old man with like a dog or something, and he's sitting on a park bench. He's got some cookies or sour cake or something, and he invites me to sit down and offers me some, and he's talking to me telling me a story, something, and then he gives me like a piece of paper or something, and the instant he gives it to me, all of a sudden the soldiers reappear. And they're blowing him to bits, blowing the dog to bits, blowing, maybe people in the park. It seems like, there was like vague images of other people in the park, blowing everybody to bits, blood and gore and bits of bone and so forth. And I'm left standing. I'm the only one left standing. And then the third one was we were like standing in lines. And I was in line with a lot of people, and it was, it had kind of like this feeling of concentration camp sort of thing. These lines. And it was like we were standing in line to do something or go somewhere, or something bad was supposed to happen. And I knew we had to escape, or I knew I had to escape. And there was this little girl. It's like the same little girl that was in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And she was in the line next to me. And she recognized me, and I saw that she recognized me. And I knew that, she better not say anything to me, because if she does, the soldiers will come and they'll blow everybody away again. So I kept my head down, and I was talking to her like out of the side of my mouth. "Don't look at me. Don't say anything to me. Don't act like you know me. Please don't recognize me, because if you act like you even know me, they'll kill all of us." And she just looked at me and smiled and handed me a piece of paper that was supposed to be like a note on it. And this is the instant she did that. Here come the soldiers again, blowing everybody away. And I'm the only one left standing.
So you had these 3 consecutive dreams in the same night?
Yeah. Oh, it was all one dream.
I see. And at that point, was that when you woke
That's
up?
when I woke up screaming and crying.
Incredible. So that, at this point, I mean, I understand you have now extrapolated from that dream, or the series of dreams, that in essence, you were being programmed in a sense to be reclusive, not to share, that if somebody gives you information or gives you something, that you're going to be they're going to die.
Not so much that they give me information, but if they attempt to engage me in a friendly way, and ask for, because it was like they were asking for help. They wanted something from me. They wanted my friendship. They wanted me to share with them something. And basically it was last man standing.
So you're recovering this memory, and this is actually not that long ago. I mean, it's what, 10, maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little more.
11.
Yeah. And this basically impacted your entire life.
I'm sure it did. It was totally subconscious. I mean, how could something like that not impact your entire life? How could it not make you really paranoid in a sense?
And slightly antisocial, maybe?
Antisocial, absolutely.
Reclusive. So if you have special gifts, I mean, did you, in other words, in your investigation of your own self, did you reach the conclusion that perhaps you had special gifts, and that was the reason you were selected, and that they wanted you to keep those secret or separate in some way? Was that a conclusion that you came to?
Well, sure, because of the things that have happened other times in my life and the things that have happened subsequently. It's like, what it did was it drove me to the necessity for being just plain, normal, vanilla, not standing out. Don't do anything that draws attention to yourself, because if you do, people are going to get hurt. Mm-hmm. And that was probably the most profound thing that it did. So I spent many years trying to dissolve into a really normal, banal life.
That's fascinating, yeah. So you kind of tried to camouflage yourself with a pretty normal life. At what point did your life stop becoming normal?
When I started meditating. That really was, and as I said, that came about because after I had my fourth child, I was bedridden. And when you have a really active mind like mine, and you're under this kind of stress, and you need to relieve that stress and the frustration. Of course, trying to live the normal life is extremely stressful and frustrating. So everything kind of like came to a head, and here I was bedridden, and I decided to learn how to meditate, and I combined some clever hypnotherapy techniques with some standard meditation techniques as I understood them, and started having really extraordinary experiences very, very fast. I mean, you could say that I had your typical shamanic initiatory experiences.
So, and are you familiar with Kundalini? Do you feel that you awakened your Kundalini?
Well, I know what people talk about Kundalini. I don't know if Kundalini is exactly what happened, but what I had was a powerful cleansing experience. And it, certainly the way some people describe their Kundalini experiences could have described what happened to me. But I don't know that that's necessary. I mean, that's once again one of those things where where's the empirical evidence? I don't believe anything.
Okay.
I had a powerful experience, and it had extraordinary physiological symptoms, and it had extraordinary psychological effects. Freeing, liberating. I went through this whole period experiencing psychokinesis to such an extent that I actually got afraid to go places because I was afraid something was going to break in my presence. Okay. Windows, electronic objects, glasses, pictures. Sometimes I only had to look at something, and in fact, that still happens. Now if I tend to not listen to myself and get them out, take care of myself or take care of things, or if there's something out there that's threatening, things break. And in fact, I'd like to show you the most recent object.
Okay.
I'm going to send somebody to go and get it, and you're going to
That's
have
a good idea.
You'll have a look at the one of my most recent psychokinetic experiences. All right, so here.
Okay, so that's an
So
amazing.
you see, this is my most recent event.
I can't believe it.
This is a cast iron skillet. It was one of my
Wow.
favorites. It belonged to my great grandmother,
Amazing.
and it wasn't even hot when I looked at it. I had just, it was there, and I was.
Were you upset at the moment?
Well, there were a lot of things going on, and there were a lot of things that I needed to get a handle on. The universe and the subconscious mind is marvelously metaphorical. So this is a message to myself,
Okay.
which is what most psychokinetic activity is, by the way. It's people sending messages to themselves. Even a lot of poltergeist type activity, but that's a whole other topic.
Well, did it scare you when this happened?
No.
There had to be a loud noise, right?
Yeah, everybody else was in the room too.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah. Anna, you were there, weren't you? When the-
Nobody heard about it right after I was in the office.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. There were 4 or 5 people in the kitchen when it happened, and we're all just standing there going.
Uh-huh.
And then I turned around and I said, "All right, who's pissing me off?"
Incredible. Okay. Have you ever hurt yourself?
No.
Never. And
No.
what about hurting other people?
No.
Have you? No.
No.
Just kind
No,
of
I send
assign
messages
yourself.
to myself.
Right. I understand.
And usually it's pretty clear what the message is. One of my favorite ones was I have a bust of Edward VII that my grandparents acquired prior to the coronation that never happened because he abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson. But they had acquired this as a souvenir. And it was something that I acquired when my grandparents died. But anyhow, so I've got this bust of Edward VII. And he's sitting up on top of a bookcase, and my youngest daughter came in. I was reading a book, and I was reading about, Templars. And she came in with a piece of gold foil paper and said, "Mommy, can you cut me out a crown to wear?" And I said, "Sure." I put my book down and I got the scissors and I sat there and I cut her out a crown and taped it so she could wear this crown on her head. And as soon as I handed it to her, all of a sudden Edward VII came tumbling off the shelf, broke into pieces, dented my end table, and then I turned the page and after all of this was cleaned up and everything, I was very upset about it because there was no ostensible reason for Edward to come tumbling off the shelf. But then I turned the page and there's, in the book that I was reading, they were reciting the old nursery rhyme about Jack and Jill went up the hill, and how this had come about as it had described, certain, some royal battles or something. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown.
Right.
And here I had just made a crown. Edward VII, who never was crowned, fell off the shelf, and I turned the page and read about, Jack breaking his crown. So I never figured out what the message of that one was, but that was one of those really weird things, that just happens to me.
Well, are you familiar with your prior lives?
Most of them, yeah.
Okay. And do you think that you were a king at any point?
No,
You don't?
no. No, I don't think it would have anything to do with that. No. Oh, God, I wouldn't want to be a king. No, but in my immediate past life, I was just a German housewife in Nazi Germany, married to a Jew, and the Nazis came and took my husband and my children, and I committed suicide. So I did fall down and break my crown.
Oh, I see.
I jumped out a window.
Okay. At what point did you get into the contact with the C's, as you call them, the Cassiopeians?
Well, I think that actually began at that time, 1985, because what I was doing was I was doing I mean, when you're laid up in bed, sometimes you meditate twice, 3 times a day, just to keep your stress level down. And the thing is I went at it just for stress relief. I mean, that was what I was after.
So you weren't seeking enlightenment per se?
No.
Okay.
I mean, the technique I designed was designed for stress relief. Yeah, I had no idea it was going to do what it did.
Okay. So at that point, when you say you think you contacted the seas, then, I mean, in other words, because I understand that you work with a Ouija board, and there's a group actually that you work with, and I want you to describe all of that. But how did you get to that point if you started with the meditation?
Well, what happened was that when I wasn't meditating during this period, I was reading. And I had subscribed to a library by mail service, and I would read these books, because this is where the whole religion thing came in, because I decided, okay, this is time to read about those things that are in my mind that I'm curious about, because I'm curious about this issue of good and evil and the end of the world, and the whole eschatological ideas, because these things because I'd had dreams when I was young about the end of the world.
Okay.
And these were recurrent dreams, or what I perceived or understood or explained to myself as the end of the world. Whether it was the actual end of the world, I don't know, but they were some pretty troubling and repetitious
So you
dreams.
saw, I'm assuming, cataclysms of some kind?
Oh, yeah.
Did you have, like, water, tsunamis, that sort of thing?
Cataclysms, smoke, fire, scorched earth, cracked earth, dinosaur-type creatures, striding around, reptilian-looking creatures, serpents, slithering everywhere. I mean, it was some pretty creepy stuff for a young kid who'd never been exposed to today's form of, horror flicks to be seeing in their dreams. I mean, I was never exposed to a movie, a book, a photograph, an image of any kind that would ever, put that kind of thought in my mind at that age. Just, I was growing up in the 50s. Come on, that stuff wasn't available. So those things back when I was like 21, 22, I remember having some more of these dreams, and I told one of my girlfriends, we're driving down the road, and I said, things are going to get very, very bad on this planet. I have the feeling by the time I'm 50 years old, things are going to be very, very bad. I just feel this something inside me that says this. Well, you kind of brush that stuff off. It's just stuff that you think or say when you're young and impressionable.
So fast forward, you're meditating, you think you're having some contact with the deceased, but how does that manifest?
Well, I was reading these books, and I was reading, what happened was I read Immanuel Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision, because I'd read an article about, eschatological scenarios, and it mentioned Velikovsky. And I said, I got to get this book. Well, finding his book was a little hard, but I actually went to the library in town at some point and found a copy of it on selling off their books that they were taking off the shelves for 25 cents. But anyway, I got a copy of it, and I read it, and I was reading this stuff, and it was like opened the whole new view of the Bible to me. Because as I said, I was raised in a very religious family, and I had read the Bible, completely through, cover to cover several times. And this was like a whole different way of looking at the Bible than, the faith-based way. Although actually Velikovsky was, writing from kind of a faith-based perspective. It was a Jewish one, not a Christian one. His belief was that the Exodus really happened, so he was interpreting these things as the events of the Exodus. But I think that they were much older stories that were later conflated with still other stories to create an Exodus story, because the Exodus as described in the Bible never happened. But anyway, so I would be sitting there, and I would read up something that he had written, and I would stop and I'd look up and I'd think to myself, wow, is that possible? And as soon as I would say this in my own head, all of this information would begin to like flow. And it would be like my own thoughts. You know, like, yes, not only is it possible, you know, consider this, and da, 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 da. And it would bring up, you know, and it absolutely could be just rearranging, reorganizing all of the material that was in my brain from years and years and years of reading a book a day that was just being sorted and reorganized in my brain and spit back in response to my question. You know, the brain's like a computer. Who knows what it can do? It's amazing.
Absolutely. But was there information that also you hadn't maybe studied, new information that came in?
Yes, and there were ways of putting things together that were totally unique. And the funny thing about it was that I would start to write this down, and here's where it got really weird. Because I would start to write things down, and I would write things that I didn't know what was coming.
What do you mean?
I would have asked this question in my mind, like, is it possible for the sun to do this? You know, I mean, here they're describing, you know, the temperature in the corona, the temperature at the surface of the sun, the temperature of the interior of the sun. You know, something is wrong with the way these numbers are adding up. You know, what is the reason for this? And I would start writing things, you know, and they were like, I never heard of them before. And I didn't know, I mean, because, you know, when you're talking or when you're writing a letter, dear so-and-so, I'm writing to inform you that I'll be coming to visit you on Tuesday of next. You've got in your mind what you're going to put in this letter.
Right.
And you know what you're going to say, and it's just a question of putting it together. I mean, that's different from writing when you don't know what's coming, which is a kind of a unique thing. And then I would say, well, I have to go and take care of the children, or I have to go cook dinner or something, or I have to go do this or that, or whatever. So I would put it down, and it would like stop. But it would be like it was backing up in my head. And it would back up to the point where I felt it was like pressure, like I was having a headache, just like a headache. And I'd say, you know, I've got to go, because some parts of it would leak out, you know, like words, you know, like, wait a minute, you know. And it just seemed like I was just thinking, okay, now I'm supposed to be, you know, cooking here, but I'm really thinking about, you know, the relationship between the magnetism of this planet to that planet, and you know, the solar radiation and gravity and planetary distances and you know, blah blah blah, you know, and what do you think would happen if that happened? And you know, I was thinking about these things, and they would like leak out of my head.
So at some point you would go and have to
So I
write
had
it
to
down?
stop
Okay.
and go write it down. And I have boxes full of this material.
Fascinating.
So
how did you make the transition then from doing
the
that?
problem was I didn't trust it as channeling.
Okay, so at this point, we are at this point where you are putting two and two together. You've meditated. You've got contact, in essence, with the seas, although you don't actually know it's the seas.
Well, you have to understand that during these meditative experiences, or during meditation, I would tend to, you know, some people call it samadhi, when you're just kind of like gone, and you're just gone for extended periods of time. So I guess if that's what you want to call it, that's what was happening, and I would be gone for extended periods of time. And, you know, what was going on inside my head was not something that was foreign or different. It was essentially myself in the future. It was just, you know, a wider scope of consciousness. So when people talk about the seas, you know, it always entertains me, because they're saying, you know, oh, I'm in touch with the seas, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I didn't remember, you know, talking to you lately, because it's basically, as they have said, and as it has proven to be, you know, through the years, it's just a really highly expanded state of consciousness that expands into the future and the past, and laterally, I suppose. because, you know, if you're members of a soul group, certainly there would be other individuals on the planet who might be, you know, part of the C's soul group. So it's not like a singular thing, but I would say that it's not all inclusive of all of humanity either.
And that makes sense.
But it never was an intrusive thing. It never felt like anything other than the action of my own brain working through a problem. And in fact, you know, there have been many times when I was, like in school, when I would be working, like for example, on mathematics. And, you know, when you work very hard on a math problem, how you feel this pressure right here, you've got stuff going on in this forward part of your brain. And that's in a sense how it felt. It felt like my brain was applying, you know, kind of something like sheer brute thinking power on a problem, sorting it out. That's how it felt. Maybe that's what it is.
Okay. So at that point, though, I'm just kind of putting myself back where you were at that point, because you went from that place to actually using a Ouija board, and I'd like you to describe.
Well, there
that
was
process.
a lot of water over the dam and under the bridge between then and then, because 1985, there was a good 7 more years of studying and researching a lot of things before I began the experiment that led to, you know, that other form of communication with the seas. There was a lot of experimentation in many things. Hypnotherapy. I was doing exorcisms. You know, a lot of studying, a lot of research, trying to find out what was. And of course, I became kind of obsessed with the material that had come through my own head, and I wrote it down. I wrote this manuscript that I call the Noah Syndrome, because everything kind of focused on the idea of that formulated in my brain of quantum metamorphosis on a macrocosmic scale, because it seemed to me that this was the central idea of the eschatological thesis. And I began to research to see if this was actually, you know, something that was possible. And I did a lot of studying and reading in quantum physics, and certainly not as a professional in any respect, and following up all the trails and all the clues that I had put together in this manuscript to see if any of it was even remotely possible, because the scenario that presented itself in these thoughts, shall we call them, that I was having, was pretty horrendous, which was that, you know, yes, the planet does transform, but a transformation of the planet is essentially, to us at our level, a cataclysmic event. Because if you say, if an atom goes through a quantum leap transformation, or acquires electrons or loses electrons or whatever, you know, changes from, you know, one state to another, or maybe from one element to another by the acquisition or the losing of some particle or some part of it. At that level, it's got to be cataclysmic for that atom. And if you think of the solar system as a giant atom, and I know that's frowned on by certain mainstream scientific thinking, but I still think that it's a useful metaphor. But if you're thinking about a solar system going through a quantum transformation to become something else, alchemically speaking, it's gonna be cataclysmic. It can't be otherwise. And cataclysm on that level does not bode well for humanity. And I began to think that this is what these dreams, these things that I had seen, is that they were pointing to this cataclysmic transformation. So of course, if you're thinking about a cataclysmic transformation of your world, the first thing you're going to think about is, oh my God, you know? I mean, where's Noah in the ark when you need him? And that concept of Noah and his ark captured my attention, because all of these stories of former cataclysms that you can possibly relate to transformations in the state of the world, such as the fall from Eden. Other transformations were undoubtedly cataclysmic, and if you read the science, study the geology, the archaeology, the paleontology, you realize that these cataclysms have occurred repeatedly on this planet. And we don't know with each one of these cataclysms what life was like for the beings that occupied the planet. For example, a solar system that exists in a different cosmic ray environment could be very different from the solar system or the Earth or reality as we experience it now.
Okay, let me ask you this though. At this point, because we're kind of following a chronology here, and you're going through an experience, your mind is opening up to all these aspects, and you're thinking about them. And obviously, you're now encountering, like you're putting two together, and you're getting the notion of a cataclysm and something coming on in the future of the world. You're looking at. And I don't know. Are you concentrating on 2012 at all, or are you just looking all over the place?
At this point, come on, this is 1985.
Okay.
86. I mean, was anybody really talking about 2012 then? I mean, maybe a few fringe people, but it wasn't like, anybody was talking about it.
Okay.
So what I was concerned with was the concept of Noah and the ark, because all of the stories talk about a fall from Eden or a fall from a higher estate, that humanity was once in a different state of existence and that he fell. And this was undoubtedly basically a description of a cataclysm, a global cataclysm.
But at that point, were you aware of ETs, for example?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I mean,
but is this the year?
I was a good Christian girl.
Okay.
What do you think you're saying?
Okay, that's fair. But because how did you get you're also talking about this is when you started meditating, right? Mm-hmm. You're having all these experiences. Mm-hmm. You're gonna make a transition. You're actually saying it took 7 years to make a transition to using the board. Mm-hmm. From that, so you were already getting information for almost 7 years, and did that continue? In other words, that you were writing down, you're saying you have records, but you didn't trust it.
Well, it's not that the problem was that I didn't really realize what I was doing, because I thought that, okay, that's just happening in my head. I'm just thinking. Mm-hmm. I want to know more than what I can just think of.
Okay. So you didn't think you were channeling, is that in other words you're saying?
Of course not.
Had you read channeling at that point or anything?
At that point, no. I mean, I'd read Edgar Cayce. I think I'd read a lot about these kinds of things. Did you read the raw
material, for example?
Oh no, not until way later.
Okay.
It was probably somewhere along in the very late 80s, very early 90s, probably 89, 90, that I started really reading channeled material, because I wanted to know if anybody else was thinking the same things that I was thinking, about this macrocosmic quantum transformation, basically an alchemical event,
But you're also married to, an expert on hyperdimensional.
I wasn't married to him then.
Okay. So when did that happen?
All of that he came after the cease. But anyway.
Oh, I see.
And the funny thing was that as I was doing all of this, it was, in a sense, it was destroying my marriage. Because you can't be a good Christian girl and, I was already stretching being a good Christian girl by being involved in doing hypnotherapy and some of the other things that I was, reading and studying about.
Right.
I was really pushing the boundaries on that, and I didn't talk about that, in my Christian environment. Mm-hmm. So, and when you start little by little divesting yourself of all of the things that once held big places in your life, and the other partner doesn't want to go there, and you realize I can't deny my brain, my mind. I can't deny my questions. I can't deny the fact that I must see. And his solution was, if you want an answer, it's in the Bible. Okay. If it's not in the Bible, it's satanic. I couldn't live with that.
Right.
And I tried to open his mind, but he was too afraid. But anyhow, so years went by, and I continued to study and research. I mean, God, you have no idea the books I went through. You've seen my library. I've read nearly all of them. You've seen the ones that are stored upstairs. That's my current reading list. And then there's all the library books that I had to return.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a lot of material that I've gone through, and so I didn't think I was channeling. No.
Okay, so how did you make the leap to the board? Was that just one of your trials and errors?
Well, I've really
methods?
talked about that. These books are going to fall down here, but let me show you.
Okay.
In Amazing Grace, I go into extreme detail. This is no longer available, by the way. I'm going to try to put it back up on the internet so people can read it for free. But
that would be great.
I went into extreme detail of all the thinking that I went through when I selected the board. And I just want to say this for, you wackos out there that think that a Ouija board has some power to demonically possess you. The Ouija board has no power whatsoever. It is a tool. It is a tool, purely and simply. If anything weird, comes around or manifests in your life as a result of interacting with a board-type instrument, it's because it's already there. It's just covert. All you have done with your board is flush it out and come face to face with it, And I would much rather come face to face with anything that's hanging around in my environment and be able to deal with it than to have it, continuously, subtly, or constantly influencing me from behind the scenes. See, but that's been my experience and my observation with a lot of people who, and I mean, come on, it's one of the finest instruments for psychic and spiritual development that was ever invented. I mean, what's his name? Pythagoras used it. The ancient Chinese used it, And we still speak of Pythagoras with tremendous respect for his mathematics, for his Pythagorean theorem and that sort of thing. And the guy was using something that was very similar to a pointing, a device that you touch and it, points out letters or numbers or whatever.
I understand.
The finest channeled material in existence either began with or came entirely through a board-type instrument. The stuff that they call channeling nowadays, where somebody sits down and puts, a tinfoil pyramid on their head and starts talking to a Lord whoever in their spaceship, that's trash. It's garbage. Read the history. Read the proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research. Read some of the experiments they did. The whole research into real paranormal phenomena was completely sidetracked by the scientific establishment at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, when these societies were trying to get real scientists working on this. They moved in and they destroyed it. And what has come in to fill the gap? Quacks. Quacks and people who do not know the history and do not know the instruments and do not know what they're doing. If you do not know, it's like my husband with a physicist. Some hotshot physicist comes along, or mathematician, says, "Oh, I have this great idea, blah, blah, blah," and he writes his paper, and then he publishes it, and he comes to find out that he was, that somebody thought of it 100 years ago, and there are 10 papers written on the same topic. He's not reading other people's work first. He thinks he's invented the wheel. All these people, they think they've invented the wheel. There is tons of good channeled material out there. Excellent channeled material, but very little of it has been produced since 1915.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you've done your history in that area.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd love to find out what you consider to be the good channeled material. For example, are you saying the raw material, do you consider that to
Raw
be good?
material is an exception. That was research. It was experimental research. It was undertaken under controlled circumstances. It was a group effort. It was not just somebody sitting down one day and having their free will violate. And this is another one. This drives me nuts. People who say there's a difference between channeling and being a medium. The medium goes into a trance and her control comes in and lets you talk to the dead people, so on. And then they're saying, okay, that's one thing, but that's different from channeling, because when you channel, a space alien, just downloads into, downloads into you and speaks through you. Tell me how that is different from your control coming in and using your physical sensorium, using your mouth, your eyes, your whatever, to communicate.
Okay. So, for example, can you name some of the channels out there that in the past, or even current ones, I think his name is Bashar. Is that his name? Or
I would rather not do that, if you
that's
don't
fine.
mind.
That's absolutely fine.
It's easier just
How
to...
about in the past? Would you go into the past?
Alan Kardec, the Patient's Worth material. Those are fantastic, works. The raw material, certainly. The work of Jane Roberts, the Seth material. She began with a board. Mm-hmm. It is a way to develop, your own internal communication.
Yes.
And of course, even with the Seth material, Seth says, I'm an alternate of yourself,
Okay. So at this point, you actually started working with the board, I'm assuming. Did you work by yourself? You had to work with somebody.
I came up with the idea, first of all, that to think that, when you read the history of the paranormal, so to speak, you realize that some of these people who really did some fantastic work, amazing work, that enormous stresses were put on their bodies. There's the whole, gang of, the Skeptic Society that will, that try to tear apart some of these wonderful cases. And, I think it's Deborah Bloom wrote a wonderful book called The Ghost Hunters. There's also another one out called, about Daniel Dunglass Home, called The First Psychic. Highly recommended books. If you really want to know some, truly extraordinary paranormal phenomena going on, read Conan Doyle's history of the paranormal, where he gives, extraordinary analysis of the Fox sisters and the introduction of the, the so-called, channeling contact phenomenon. Mm-hmm. So it's clear that it put extraordinary stresses on these people, on their lives psychologically, in some cases on their physical bodies. Some of the great mediums of the past were known to lose, up to 15 pounds in a single sitting. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of weight to lose. And then there were these wonderful mediums that would produce ectoplasm. Mm-hmm. And Skeptic Society, just back off. I say I don't believe things, but let me tell you, the testimony, the photographs, the witnesses, I am 99% convinced all of these things happened, and they happened as they were described by these really extraordinary witnesses. So just leave me alone. Don't even talk to me. Okay. So there was fantastic work being done, fantastic material. And I wanted to study this before I did anything. I had read all of the stuff that was published as channeled material up to the point in the early 90s. And I thought, this is like word salad. I call it salad shooter channeling. One of those salad, And it had no depth, it had no meaning. It was all platitudinous. It was like, intonations of, love and light and, you know, good. And I mean, we can clearly see that what these channels are saying, what these entities, whatever they are, has no practical application in our real lives. I mean, sure, some people say, oh, well, you just have to love and you just have to concentrate, you have to do this. I mean, come on, just give me a break. So I was reading the history. I wanted to know what other people, and I saw that there were people who had done fantastic things. Because, you know, it's one, if you want a channel and you say, I am Lord High Poobah of the Intergalactic Command, and I'm going to tell you all this stuff, and you say all this wonderful stuff, fine.